Welcome back to Mark Haney, igniting the entrepreneurial revolution with the Haney Biz Project.
Welcome back to Haney Biz Project, brought to you courtesy of Hub International. I'm Mark Haney, and today I am here with Dan Bout, the Assistant Director for Response for the California Office of Emergency Services. And we need you today, Dan. We've got some emergencies happening in this country. They're happening in Sacramento, but even more broadly, all over California. What's going on right now in California that's right, I guess, in the middle of your radar?
So, there's a host of incidents. I think the one that's on the forefront right now are the wildfires we have. So across the state, we have a number of major wildfires. Tom Keegan mentioned, the California National Guard is providing that aviation support in support of Cal Fire. And so, throughout the state, you have these fires. Some of them are happening deep in the woods. Essentially, they don't have a lot of impacts, but many of these are burning close to our communities, right? And so as soon as one of these wildfires creeps into an area where it starts putting homes and property at risk, that obviously raises its profile, how we allocate assets against those fires. And so those are burning, again, up and down the state. We have some tropical moisture that's coming in that's causing a lot of lightning strikes.
Okay.
And that's, that starts more of these fires as we go along. And then, of course, we have the unfortunate incident you referenced in Sacramento, where we lost an officer earlier this week, and we're doing a memorial for that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the fire situation first. Where are the hot spots today, and what do we expect moving forward? Is there any way to predict what's going to happen?
Well, we're fortunate in that Cal Fire and the U.S. Forest Service have incredible modelers. So what they're doing is they're looking at, where the winds are, they're looking at the weather, and they're kind of forecasting based on all these different factors where they think the fire will go. Now, fire is pretty inherently unpredictable. A lot of time it's creating its own weather. And so it'll jump containment lines. It'll move into areas that we thought we had good containment on, or it'll move in directions we didn't anticipate. And so it changes on a day-by-day, if not hour-by-hour basis.
Today being, or this week being the anniversary of 9/11, it makes me think about my friends who are in the fire service, and I know some of them spent some time in the military, and then have gone on to become firefighters. And so many people were influenced by 9/11 to go out and join the Marines, join the Army, become a firefighter. How do you think 9/11 has changed things for America?
Well, I think it changed enormously. You mentioned there's a lot of people who had a sense of calling to help our country, right? And that expressed itself a lot of times with joining the armed services. But a lot of times there were people who became first responders because they looked at those heroes in the aftermath of what happened in New York and the Pentagon, and they said, this means something to me, right? This person's life has meaning. They made a difference, and I want to be part of that community. And so there's an enormous amount of first responders that really felt that first calling when they saw the aftermath.
Well, I think that's when I saw America come together. We're watching this on the news, my son and I, as I'm getting ready to take him to school, and he ended up joining the Marines. But I remember that time being a time when America came together, and it just makes me, and then now you see us maybe separating in some ways and for certain reasons. And I'm wondering, what can we do as ordinary citizens? Obviously, you have a huge influence in bringing people together, but what can we do to bring people together? Does it really take tragedy to bring people together?
Wow, that's I don't know that it takes a tragedy to do it, but anytime you have these precipitating events, something where people really question what has value to me, right? That's when you start to see this. It happened in Harvey. And I'm sure it's happening right now in Florida. People band together when they have something, a reason to band together. And short of that, a lot of times you don't see that quite as much. You'll see the cliques form, and it's a lot of times very similar to grade school, right? People will hang around the people that they meet, they know, and it's not they're trying to exclude anyone. It's just their circle's relatively associated with their immediate interests. And
Well, how would you compare what's going on in California and the kinds of disasters that we face, I guess natural disasters, when it comes to fire, earthquake? how would you compare that to the devastation that other states might see? Obviously, what's going on right now with Harvey and Irma is off the charts. That's at level 10 in terms of a nightmare, I suppose. But how does California stack up to that in terms of natural disaster and emergency needs?
Right. So, I mean, the most of what you see is the emergency management infrastructure, right? So what we would call the incident command system. So the DNA for how we respond, not just in the United States but internationally, started here in California, because we had such an enormous wildfire threat. Because the kind of incidents we face, whether they be catastrophic earthquakes or catastrophic flooding, are of such a magnitude that we have to kind of have these rules for how people will coordinate in large disasters. So from the framework of capabilities, we have, I would argue, the best capabilities in the world. But again, to match that, we have these threats. Unlike what we're seeing with the hurricanes, where you have multiple days of notice, when our earthquakes hit, we won't have but a few seconds of notification. And so that's a whole different dynamic, because you have no time to prepare other than what you put into practice beforehand.
What is preparation? So there's no way to prepare for an earthquake, I take it. But what about fire? Is there a way to prepare for fire?
Well, I should be clear. There actually are things you can do, right?
Okay.
So, and these are things that are easy to miss. But things like having a kit at home, right? Talking with your children about, hey, here's what we're going to do if a disaster happens. Making sure you talk to your daycare provider or school and know, hey, if this happens, right? If we have an earthquake, if there's a scenario and I can't contact the school, where are the children? What's their safe area? What's the procedure to pick them up? And a lot of times parents, they assume that, well, the school saw through it, and assuredly they have. But if you don't know that answer, and now you can't call your school because the phone lines are down, now you're in a panic situation,
You
right?
need a
And you're not
plan.
thinking at your best, right? And so, yeah, like anything, you want to have a plan beforehand. You want to have thought through at least, here's what we're going to do. And now you don't feel that like pit of your stomach, like I'm unprepared when it happens.
Well, let's talk about the overarching career that you have, Dan. You're also an Army lieutenant colonel, right? You're in the reserves. Talk to us about that, and maybe just how your career, what inspired you to take on this role of helping out our community, helping out our country.
So, so I joined back in the 90s, and I enlisted in the active duty Army initially just because I needed college money. I was like, hey, this is great.
Yeah.
You see the kind of the commercials and rappelling out of helicopters.
Yeah,
I'm like,
looks
that's what I
fun.
want to do.
You're an athlete.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I joined, and it kind of became a little bit of a calling. I really appreciate. I like being with the infantrymen down in the dirt. I had a couple deployments on active duty, but at the time these weren't combat deployments. This is like Bosnia Herzegovina. And then I left active service because I wanted to finish graduate school. That's why I enlisted in the first place. And so when 9/11 happened, I was just a newly commissioned officer now in the infantry, and I was teaching graduate courses at UC Davis. And then the balloon
So
went up.
you're a newly commissioned officer in the infantry, and you're teaching classes at UC Davis.
Right.
Okay. So talk to us about what happened from there.
So I was in their doctoral program, and so the first thing I did was, I basically called in and said, hey, I can't teach class today. So I was a active guardsman. I reported to the headquarters, said, okay, so, where are you sending me? Because, I was so used to active duty, and actually there was a host of missions that the Guard was filling, right, for Homeland Security type functions. And so they found one of those, and I took a time off from school, and actually only took about a month off. So I was scheduled for deployment. This was in the spin-up prior to the actual war.
Okay.
And I had about 2 or 3 months. So, I remember when I went into course, there's a lot of questions, where were you for the first month? And it was a little interesting because we're still in that period where people really didn't realize how disconnected they were from the military. So, I had students asking me like, they're like, okay, so you're a ranger? I was like, yeah, absolutely. And they're like, well, what national park? Because there was just this absolute disconnect from.
I'm Special Forces, sir.
Right. So, but it was an interesting time because there was such a,
Yeah.
the military had been very much an afterthought until this all happened in many people's lives.
Today's an interesting show, and we got to wrap it up. But so I have to thank you, Dan, for sharing your story. We got it cut off short because we have Rick and Rita Cobb coming up, detectives from Riverside. But it just shows me, in talking to you, and I think it tells our audience, You know, you guys are just normal guys. You put your pants on one leg at a time, yet you put your life on the line. You're out there, you know, when the phone rings and there's an emergency, somebody's got to answer that phone. And I want to thank you for being one of those guys. And thanks for coming on the show today. When we return again, we'll have Rick and Rita Cobb, 2 detectives from Riverside. Join the revolution at HaneyBiz.com. Brought to you courtesy of the Entrepreneurs Organization of Sacramento and law firm Greenberg Traurig. This is the Haney Biz Project.